Haley Daniels,
Woo!
welcome to the Athletes Podcast. This is episode 104. We've been trying to get you on for a while here, and we're so grateful to have you join in the Athletes Podcast. Thanks for so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I am super excited about this episode in particular because of how unique this sport that you participate in is, slalom canoe. Can you dive into what it is in layman's terms for someone who doesn't necessarily know the sport? We've got over 100 episodes now, as I just mentioned, but we feature unique athletes and unique sports, and you, of all people, will know that this is a fun one that you can probably describe in some detail here.
Totally. So canoe slalom, also known as whitewater canoeing and whitewater kayaking, you basically are going against the elements on a river. So you have gates and you go down green gates and up red gates. And if you touch a gate, it's a 2-second penalty. And if you miss a gate, it's a 50-second penalty. So you really don't want to miss a gate. It happens more often than you'd think, but it's a thing. And it's kind of like big mountain skiing and slalom skiing. So if you were to think of big mountain, like we are the slalom skiers, but we also do big mountain. So we call it creeking. So it's where you go on steeper creeks and go off waterfalls and crazy rapids, anywhere from class 0 to 6. 6 would be Niagara Falls. So we don't do 6 very often. But yeah, we are definitely trying to get down the course as fast as possible. And we just had a new sport added to the Olympics for Paris, and it's called extreme slalom.
Okay.
So it's the exact same as ski cross, where you have 4 people going down a course at the same time, except in boats. You have 4 boats going down at the same time, and you're negotiating gates. You actually have a zone where you have to roll. So that's where you flip over on one side and come back up on the other. And then whoever crosses the finish line first wins.
Wow. I hope that the listeners / viewers can understand what that sounded like or looked like. Yeah, it's such a unique sport. How do you, at the age of 6 years old, start canoeing, get into this like extreme adrenaline junkie inducing activity? Like what's the inspiration? Kind of how do you end up finding yourself in this spot? Because obviously you've got an incredible story for those who don't know, but I think it would be amazing for you to dive into the details about, the ins and outs of how you got into this sport.
Yeah. So I wish I could say that I was like that young athlete and I was watching the Olympics and I was like, I want to do that one day, but that just wasn't me. Like, I think that I naturally became an athlete just because I have oodles and oodles of energy and I just didn't know where to channel it. And so my parents put me into sport because it was driving them nuts.
It's a reoccurring theme on the Athletes Podcast.
Yeah. So I definitely just spent time outside with my family growing up canoeing and kayaking. And then my parents took me to a kayaking camp and I fell in love with it. And then yeah, I just kind of kept on going to these camps and kept on going to competitions and then slowly realizing that I really liked it and that I wanted to get better. And so I started as a kayaker where you're sitting and you have 2 blades on either side and you have a spray skirt that closes the boat. And then I switched to canoeing, which is a very similar boat, except you're kneeling with straps over your knees and you have a single blade.
Interesting. And so, pros and cons to canoe versus kayak. What are they? Like, do you prefer one obviously more than the other? Is there like, I'm just curious because this is not a sport that people are typically doing, on their Sunday, right? So what's the like background on each for you? Do you prefer doing one in rough water versus calm water? Like, yeah, I'm looking for the nitty gritty here.
Yeah. So canoeing, that's what I do competitively. And that's what I went to Tokyo for. But I prefer kayaking when there's big water. So when I am doing like class 5 paddling, like I want 2 blades so I can get down that river properly and have crisp lines, because if you don't have the right lines, the consequences are really high. But yeah, I think I love both of them. They both have some cool things about them. In a canoe, when you're slalom canoeing, you have a really light bow. So, in the episode of Friends where Ross is like, pivot. And he's like trying to get the couch up and down the stairs. So we pivot in our boat all the time.
Okay.
And when you pivot in a canoe, you have a really light bow, so you can actually whip it way faster. Where in a kayak, you have to lift your legs every single time you pivot. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. So you win bronze Toronto 2015 Pan Am Games. I'm like now going through kind of piece together your career now as you've now returned from Tokyo 2021, like this incredible experience where you maybe didn't get the result you were looking for, but you were able to go to these games and participate, and very unique games. The first time that women are competing in this sport that was so, I don't know what's the right word, just neglected from the female perspective, in the sense that the IOC was not willing to let women participate just from a strictly old timer, old rule. Like, do you want to go into the details on that so I don't butcher it?
Yeah, it's all good. As I said, I switched from kayaking to canoe because we found out that there was an opportunity that women's canoeing was going to be added to the Olympics. And I was about 15 years old at this point. And so I made the switch, and it took a really long time for the International Canoe Federation and the International Olympic Committee to finally say, okay, women's canoeing is going to be the Olympics. We were at the World Championships for 4 Olympic cycles and the World Cups. And the Pan Am Games was the first multi-level sporting games that we were added to in 2015. So it was a really long fight. And I'm super grateful that I was the representation for Canada. It was even a fight to get to the Olympics because I had some really strong competition in Canada. Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of reasons it happened. But I think it was just a lack of clarity and a lack of vision from some key decision makers, unfortunately, and they just dragged their feet in the sand and didn't make decisions quick enough for us to realize our goals in London or Rio, but finally Tokyo. So now we can finally say that we're working towards the Olympics and have Olympians in our sport, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And hey, I mean, I don't want to bring up the past, but it's good to also recognize and learn from, those mistakes that they've hopefully tried to rectify now. And obviously moving forward, you're going to be competing every 4 years. This is a sport that it is so adrenaline inducing. It's crazy as you watch these athletes go through down this just insane water. I'm like, we're here in Niagara Falls right nearby. So, we see that level 6 all the time, but to imagine someone going down that in a small little vessel is pretty crazy. How do you train for it? Like, this is a unique sport. I see you posting on your Instagram all the time, different training techniques that you're implementing. Like, what's kind of your newfound way to create ultimate performance for this sport? Because it's not something that I assume you're sitting on the bench press and squatting and deadlifting. Like, you're going sport specific for your training here. What are some of the things that you're incorporating?
It is a very fast-paced sport, and so we have 90 seconds that we need to perform, but we'll dead stop it sometimes, and then we have to reaccelerate from that. So it's a lot of explosive training. But right now we're in the off season, so off season is just building an anaerobic base. So I'm biking a lot, doing a lot of intervals. My favorite thing ever, not, but no, there's a place for everything, and you have to do it all to complete the circle. But our sport is very technical. So the majority of our training is on the water, on whitewater, in gates. And we try and do that as much as possible all year round. So in the winter, we're mostly traveling, or we're in Western Canada and Vancouver because you can paddle all year there, even though it's really
Whereabouts
cold.
in Vancouver?
In Chilliwack.
Oh, okay. Good.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
We
Good
spend a lot of time in Chilliwack. So it's not an artificial course. So most of our races and competitions are on like a concrete ditch in the middle of the city. But the rivers in Canada we're super lucky because they're in really beautiful locations. But like Tokyo, for example, was beside Disneyland, and like right in the middle of the city, and the water's just recirculating around. And so the water turns on at a certain time, and then we get on a conveyor belt. We paddle through the flat water section, we get on the conveyor belt, we go back up again. So training kind of just looks like hour sessions here and there, and it's usually about 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. And not all of that is physical training. There's a lot of mental training in there as well. And video and sports psych and physiotherapy, the whole meal deal.
Yeah, it's a full-time gig. And I remember hearing in an interview, I think you did in 2017, that your training costs about $50,000 on an annual basis. Is that number still correct? And like, how the heck is someone who's, young in the sport trying to even wrap their head around making that feasible if they don't have tons of sponsors? Like, what was the process you had to go through? Because a lot of what we're doing here with the Athletes Podcast is trying to educate as well as entertain that next gen as to how to go about, living their life, pursuing their dreams of becoming a professional athlete. We also try and showcase the not so glamorous aspects, because people don't necessarily realize the amount of effort that it takes to get to that top 1% echelon. Like, I'd love for you, having been someone who's battled for years, to shine some light on what it was like for you going through that process.
Yeah, so $50,000 is one of the numbers. It costs anywhere from $50,000 to $90,000 a year. So in the first Olympic qualification year before the pandemic, it was about $85,000. And that is a lot of money. You were totally right. It is a super daunting number. So I when I first started working on sponsorships and fundraising, I was working a part-time job, and I was literally just asking anyone I knew how I can fund what I'm doing. And I got a lot of advice. And the first advice I got was from my coach. And he said, okay, how much money are you making at your part-time job? And I was like, oh, I don't know, $15 an hour. And he said, okay, well, why don't you just quit your job and spend that time that you would working part-time on finding sponsorships? And it's a do or die. Like, you have to get money. So like, literally block that time off and go do it. And so I quit my job and I went and did that. Wow. And it was really lucrative. So the first thing that I did was I built myself a brand. So what I wanted to speak to as an athlete. So for me, it was representing and advocating for gender equality. I'm also a plant-based athlete, and outdoor and adventure, because that's what my sport is. And then I started targeting local companies, because big companies, like if you're going to go to Coca-Cola, like, you're not going to get a sponsorship. Like, they already have like their athletes for their sponsorship alignment for the next 5 years, the next 2 Olympic cycles. So it is very hard to get in there unless you are medaling at world championships or at the Olympics. Yeah, so I did that. I got a lot of little local things, but the thing that was the most lucrative for me was actually doing fundraising, and but offering a service with that fundraising, a service or a product. Right. So the first fundraiser I did was I made a vegan cookbook, and I called it the Canoeist Kitchen. And I sold these little cookbooks. They were really like literally paper stapled together and a couple printed, but it was, I was really proud of it at the moment. I actually found one the other day, and I was like, okay, like, this is pretty cute, but I can't believe I sold these. But yeah, we made quite a bit of money with that. And when I say we, like, I had a whole team of people helping me with this stuff. And then I followed that up by teaching vegan cooking classes. So I went to a kitchen and I said, hey, like, can I use your kitchen? I'm going to teach these classes. And then I sold tickets to that and had a silent auction there. And so those did pretty well, but they were a lot of work. And I got all the ingredients sponsored. So I went to a local groceria and got them to sponsor the ingredients. And I think the biggest thing about all of it is like making an event or a service of some sort, and then offering something in exchange, but keeping it local. So the last 5 years, I did a thing called a painted paddle auction.
Hmm.
So I had artists from across North America paint like kids' paddles. And
Hmm.
then we had in-person events before COVID. But after COVID, we had them online. And yeah, we raised our first one, we raised 15,000, and the last couple ones we raised $25,000 in one go. So it's I mean, it's not the full 90,
Hmm.
but it's a really it's funded most of my seasons, and a really cool way to say thank you to your community and to showcase the sport and to just bring all the people that you care about into one room is just like the most special thing ever.
Yeah, it's got to be so rewarding. I'm just like going through those paddles would be a really cool piece, like memento to have between you, that connection that you have to the paddle, as well as the artist putting that. Like, it's a trifecta that's really well done. So kudos to you for that. And not an easy thing to do. And you go by your quote, fail forward. You've got a superstitious spider tattoo on your wrist that you touched before every starting run. Do you want to maybe uh, scratch the surface, pun intended, on that one, and just like what's behind that one?
Totally. So there's this book called Spiders in Space. It's written by the chief economist at ATV. And it talks about when spiders went to space, they adapted quicker than humans and spun their webs without gravity. So they spin webs with gravity, and there's no gravity in space. So it is a
Dang.
metaphor for adaptability. And I got Be a Spider. It's Be a Spider under my wristband here. And then my brother got In Space. And yeah, be completely transparent. We had our family's gone through some really, really big transitions and some a lot of adversity over the last five
Hmm.
years. And it was really hard on me mentally. And my sports psych handed me this book, and she's like, I think you should read this. So I read it, and it had a really big impression on me. And my brother and I were in New Zealand at one of my best friend's weddings, and uh, we walked into a tattoo shop and we got tattoos. But it's always been a reminder that you can get through anything and that you can spin your web without gravity. You just have to figure it out and believe.
Wow, I am so glad I asked you that question, because that's a fantastic, incredible answer. Let's talk about that transition in this past 5 years. Your dad, Kimberly Daniels, made history as the only first openly transgender Olympic judge in 2021 in Tokyo. Um, 85 years ago, men's canoeing was introduced into the Olympics. Now, after the years of advocacy, you being the first Canadian woman canoeist to compete in the games, like, can you explain what that meant for your dad to be alongside you with throughout that journey?
Yeah, I mean, in a year where no one had their friends or family at the Olympics with them, I felt pretty grateful to be able to have my dad on the side of the river with me. Um, so before the pandemic, um, my dad came out as transgender to our family, and we kind of had this agreement that my dad wouldn't come out to the world until after the Olympics because we didn't want any negative PR coming towards us. But then the pandemic happened, and my dad was living full time as Kimberly, and I didn't want to hold my dad back of being who she was. So I said, let's just scream it off the rooftops together and let's do this. So we got a photographer at the Canadian Olympic Committee and the Canadian Sports Institute, and we came out. And through that process, we had a lot of media, and we found out that, yeah, she was the first ever transgender judge. So, yeah, I think for me, like, there's no manual for when
Hmm.
someone transitions. It's even though you love your parents, it's still a transition.
For sure.
Um, it's even like changing the pronouns to she/hers been hard for me because when I'm talking about my dad in the past, she was a he. So I'm still grappling with language and everything. But for me, it all comes down to love. And I love my dad. I love my mom. I love my brother. And we all work together and figure it out. And so you just kind of although there's a lot of stuff coming down on you, you figure it out together. And I think having really open conversations and asking really forward and awkward questions is actually the thing that got us through it. So
Yeah.
yeah, and you just have to be completely transparent. And my dad is the happiest I've ever seen her, which for me, that makes it all worth it. And we've had so many people message us and send us really inspiring messages, but a lot of people who have felt the courage to be themselves or come out themselves because of my dad. So I think that makes it all worth it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And this like excelling in sports thing is not just solely you and the Daniels family. Your great grandfather was an international skeet shooter. Your grandfather won the Grey Cup with the Toronto Argonauts. Uncle, national water polo team. Dad held the junior Canadian swim records. Like growing up, your family's hitting the Rockies almost every weekend, hiking, swimming, fishing, paddling. Like, how has it been being just engulfed by sport, outdoor activity, and health and wellness basically since the time you've been born? Like, that's got to be and led you towards this incredible career, both as an athlete and now all the extracurriculars that you were doing that you were talking to me about prior to this conversation going live. Like, dive into how impactful that's been for you, having that family that's kind of allowed you to just be who you want to be at the end of the day.
I think, I never actually as much as sport has been a part of our family, I've never been like felt pressure to perform or to be an
Mm,
athlete. I think it's just, again, I just fell into it naturally. But um, really, I think the biggest thing that it allowed my brother and I to do, because my brother was a high performance athlete for a long time, and now he's a wildland firefighter. Um,
mm,
but I think it allowed us to take risk, calculated risk,
mhm.
and be okay with it. Like, not feel pressure and not like crack under pressure. So, and like, just, I think I enter flow state a lot quicker,
Mm,
just
okay.
because of having sport a part of my life, my whole life.
Yeah.
So I'm just a lot more comfortable being uncomfortable, and then that allows me to transition into flow state. And I notice it in a lot of sports, like mountain biking, when I'm doing big water paddling, when I'm skiing, um, even when I'm on a walk or when I'm drawing, I sometimes transition into it. And I think that that's just because I have that foundation from my family from the very get go.
Yeah, I would love for you to describe this flow state in more detail. Like, this is not an easy thing to do by any stretch of the imagination, but for every person, it's unique. And obviously, you've figured out a way to get into that flow state quickly.
I'd
Ease
say
that you
quickly.
get to.
But yeah, it's okay. So flow state is a state of mind that you're basically performing at a high level of functioning, but you're not thinking about it.
Mhm.
And I would say I'm almost like a flow junkie because I've listened to a million podcasts, books, you name it. I have tried to learn as much as I can about it because
Okay.
it is such an interesting thing, and we still don't there's no switch for it. You can't just be like flow state, like it doesn't
Hmm.
happen like that. So I think that from what I've learned about myself, and it'll be different for everyone, but for me, it's I need to have a little bit of I have to have something on the line so that I feel uncomfortable, but
Okay.
know that I have the skill set to do it, and just have to believe in myself and have a solid plan in whatever it is I'm executing. So visualization helps a lot. So if I have something ahead of me and I need um, to go do it, I'll visualize it before I go do it, both from a helicopter view and then a GoPro view in my head. And
Mm.
then it allows me to know that that's the exact motor function I need. And so I can switch off my worry and then just focus on like being reacting to the environment around me.
Super fascinating. I've never heard someone go helicopter view and then also GoPro view as far as like visualization aspect. That is very unique. Wow.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Well, we could probably do an hour long podcast on that on its own.
Yeah.
Tell me about Tokyo. Like, how was it? Were the beds as wild as people were talking about? Like, what was kind of one thing that stuck out to you, like that experience? But how was it? Because obviously this year not exactly stereotypical in the sense that COVID is well in effect, and you're having to probably stay socially distanced and not do kind of all the fun things that are necessarily involved all the time with the village that's associated with the Olympics. So maybe dive into it.
I mean, I don't have another Olympics to compare to because I wasn't allowed to go. So
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely it was a very cool experience. I think my favorite part was the food hall, because I got to see so many different types of athletes, different body types, and totally fangirling. Like, I sat at the table. I sat at a table with Yao Ming, and I was just like, it's Yao Ming, like holy cow!
Nice.
and he's huge. Like his
Yeah.
legs were toppling over the table, and seeing Naomi Osaka and like Simone Biles and Penny Olympiak, like all of these legends, was really really cool. And actually seeing Tony Hawk, that was next level cool.
Yeah.
And seeing the skateboarders added to Olympics was very very cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, the beds were very comfortable. They were made out of cardboard. They were very environmental. I did hear of some people breaking them, but we did not make that our goal because we needed a bed to sleep on for the competition night, and then you had to fly out
Understandably.
within 48 hours, right? So you just wanted to like have as little drama in your life as possible.
For
I
sure.
think it was for me it was completely overwhelming and overstimulating. I felt like there was so much I wanted to do, but I also wanted to be rested.
Right.
So that was kind of playing with that line, and it was super duper hot. So it was like at night, even it was 30 degrees. And then during the day, it
Wow.
was like 40 degrees with humidity, which makes you just so much more tired, dehydrated. So, but you had to walk to the food hall, and it was about a 10 to 15-minute walk. So it was like, okay, like going to get coffee or like breakfast in the morning, it's like put good shoes on, like have your shorts on, like bring a water bottle, put your sun hat on. Like, so it was kind of an ordeal to do everything. And I just found that like a whole other element of tiredness from that. So I feel like I did less of the stuff I wanted to do just because I wanted to be rested for the start line.
Right. Well, you got to save some stuff to do for next time, right?
Yeah.
You got to make sure that you've got things to check off your list. And I guess what will be 2024 in Paris. Crazy. Looking
Yeah.
forward, like what's this timeline then for you look like? How are you preparing? Obviously, these are like you can't go full bore 24/7, 365 after these next Olympics. Like, do you take some time to recover, get back into training? What's your routine look like between Tokyo and Paris for people who are trying to understand what the life of Haley Daniels looks like?
Yeah, so right now it's pretty busy, mostly because I was away from January of last year until after Tokyo. So we were on the road for 7 months, and there was a lot of things that I put off because of the game. So I am full steam ahead towards Paris, and I'm really excited about it. We'll be in a satellite village for those games, so less distractions for sure. And we've been able to paddle on the course there. We were training there before we went to Tokyo, so I feel like we have an advantage with that.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, everyone's going to be different. But for me, I needed a mental break.
Yeah.
I took a couple weeks off when I got home, and I was completely overwhelmed and inundated with media stuff. And I was honored to share my story, and I was honored that people wanted to learn about our sport and learn about the legacy that we left. But I just kind of wanted to be me and not be an Olympian for a second, and just like hang out with my friends and like go with my dog and like not set an alarm, like like so
Yeah.
really simple little things. But yeah, I kind of haven't had like a full break yet because I've still been hitting the ground running. So I'm hoping to do that closer to Christmas. But I'm back in my boat because I miss training so much. So
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, like I really love getting on the water, moving every day and trying to get better. And
Yeah.
when I had an absence of that in my life, for a few weeks, I was like going a little nuts. I was like,
Mhm.
okay, what am I going to do with my day? Like, okay, I can do this. But it
Yeah.
was, so yeah, I think just resetting some new goals, looking at how I can be better for the next Olympic cycle. And our Olympic qualifications are 2 years away. So it's really not like I can't really hit a pause button. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
a, okay, like slow down a little bit. We end up traveling close to 9 months of the year,
Wow.
on before the pandemic. And yeah, now I can't imagine traveling like how we did the last 8 years. So
Mm-hmm.
my goal this year is to work on my weaknesses, but in Canada for the most part.
Right.
Maybe go to Europe a couple times, but for the most part, stay in Canada, less planes, and just be recovered. So that
Mm-hmm.
when I do get on the water, I'm intentional and I can actually work on getting better versus constantly moving to different locations.
Yeah, as humans, we're creatures of habit, right? And for people to go through and be training for years back to back and then to be asked, oh, you got to take a break, get some rest, decompress, as they say, and stop training, just, do some other things, change it up. And it's like, yeah, I've been doing this my whole life. And now you're asking me to take out that consistent variable when in reality, that's, as you said, something that you enjoy and need kind of on a daily basis to get to that flow state. So yeah, and even just manipulating that schedule accordingly, I think you obviously have a great handle on it. So keep doing what you're doing, and we're excited to see what you are able to do in 2024 representing Canada. We love featuring Canadians, and it's a special part in our heart here on the Athletes Podcast to make sure we showcase the best in the world. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Haley, you are familiar with the Athletes Podcast. You know that the last question we ask every guest on our show is what their biggest piece of advice would be to the next generation of athletes. I'd love for you to dive in as someone who's faced a lot of adversity, listened to a ton of articles, critics, probably received a ton of media requests in the past year or two. Give your biggest piece of advice to that AP.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about this before I came in because there's so many good pieces of advice that I've gotten. But I think the number one piece of advice that I've gotten is, you get to do what you're doing. So you don't have to do anything. You get to be an athlete. You get to use your body. You get to push your limits. So wake up every day with that get to attitude, and it's like you can literally take on anything.
What an amazing shift of mind to reframe it to the positive format. Haley Daniels, thank you so much for coming on the Athletes Podcast. Episode 104, crazy, just getting started. Thank you for being a part of the journey. Excited to see you in 2024. Over the next couple of years, continue to crush world championships. We'll be following along.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, folks, for tuning into the 104th episode of the Athletes Podcast featuring Haley Daniels, another incredible Canadian athlete that we were able to feature on the show. Super grateful for Haley for coming on, sharing her insights, knowledge, wisdom, and, clawing a bit of that onion back and sharing a bit of what life was like having these difficult times over the past 5 years between transitions, competing at the Olympics. You name it, she's a trooper to say the least, and she has so much on the go. I'm excited to see what she's able to accomplish here over the next couple of years as she competes for that 2024 Paris Olympic spot. We just really appreciate you folks for being along on this journey. 104th episode, it keeps adding up. We keep getting to feature these incredible athletes. So grateful for this opportunity. Jordan Maslin is our producer. Ian Singleton is our videographer. My name's David Stark, the host of the Athletes Podcast. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.